Hey, so today we're going to talk about closing dates in QuickBooks Desktops. We're going to define what is a closing date, how do we set it in QuickBooks, why do we want to use a closing date, and what do we do to find transactions posted after the closing date that we've assigned. So to start, I just want to define what is a closing date. This isn't a QuickBooks specific term, right? It's just an accounting term. A closing date is basically a specific date that marks the end of a given financial reporting period. Typically, it's a month end or a year end period. The reason why we use a closing date is it does not allow a user to post before that date. So if you think about it, if you have right your month closed and you go, hey, everything's reconciled, it's good to go. That's what my January profit and loss was. You don't want someone to be able to post to that, or else you would have to figure out what was that erroneous entry that was made. So by setting a closing date, it allows you to essentially put in the fundamental control that you need to ensure that your historical financials are able to retain their integrity. All right, so to start, you have to be in single user mode to typically update any of your company preferences. So first you're going to check. You're going to go to File. If it says switch to single user mode, it means you're in multi-user mode. You need to then switch it to single user mode. If there are other people in your system, you're going to have to ask them to get out or physically kick them out through the chat function. So the way you switch is we'll click it over, and then it will essentially bring us into our single user mode. So now we're alone in QuickBooks. We're going to first go to Edit. Then we're going to go to Preferences, right? Because we have to go to our company preferences. So you're going to want to be in your Accounting tab, and you're going to want to jump to Company Preferences. So what we're going to do is go down here to closing date, where the date through which books are closed. We're going to set our date and password. At this point in our test server, we don't have anything set, so it's going to say not set. If you haven't set a closing date before, this is what yours would look like. Whatever closing date you set will then be put here. So to do it, we're going to click set date/password. So this is where we're going to be able to put in what closing date we want to use. We're going to use 12/31/2029. I personally am going to choose to exclude estimates, sales orders, and purchase orders from my closing date restrictions. The reason why you are able to do that is estimates, sales orders, and purchase orders are not financial transactions, right? If you really think about it, they're things that you're using to track stuff, right? Orders that vendors owe you or sales that you owe to customers, but they don't actually drive anything from your accounting end. They're purely for your own tracking if you really work it backwards. So there's nothing wrong with excluding it unless, of course, you use it as part of some type of reconciliation. So the next thing that I highly recommend doing is setting a closing date password. What this is going to do is that when a user tries to enter something before this closing date, it'll basically pop up with, hey, put in the password and I'll allow you to post this transaction. So then if, say, you have to post entries from your CPA or something along those lines, right, the individual with the correct privilege will be able to do their job because they would already have the password, but not just a random person who's just, either processing a transaction or accidentally makes an erroneous date error. So we're going to put in our closing date password. So I'm going to use 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nothing crazy, but just something so that I have a password. Obviously, you should make it a strong password for your own organization. This is just my test server. So then we'll select OK. And then this is fine. This is just because I'm in a test server, I don't have a password set up for my admin, so it's going, hey, you probably want one. But now if we look, the date through which my books are closed is that 12/31/2029. So now let's try to go break our system. Let's go try to post something before this date and see what it comes up as so you can see what will be prompted from that user. So I'm going to go to my check register. I'm just going to go to furniture and equipment because it locks it down for all the accounts. Doesn't matter which one you pick. And now, yeah, let's make a post for January 30th, 2025. We'll have it hit dues and subscriptions for 150,000. I know this isn't a real transaction. It makes no sense to post this in furniture and fixtures, but it's just to try to put something through. So we see it's ready. I've got my date, which is before the 12/31/2029 closing date. I'm going to go ahead and hit record. The modification will affect transactions from closed periods and could also affect previous financial reports. You must enter the closing date password to make this change. So if I'm a normal user, I'm not going to be able to. So I'm just going to X out and I'm going to go find the appropriate person. If I'm your controller, your accounting manager, who's maybe posting your CPA's closing audit entries or rolling over your retained earnings when your period would most likely be fully closed out, I would go through, hit record, simply enter my password, and look at that, I'm recorded. So then if I go to do it again, make sure our date is 1/30/25, perfect, record, it's giving me that same prompt. So even if I enter it one time, it's only capturing it for that one transaction. So you're not going to accidentally be able to, continually post to that wrong date period. It's going to prompt the password requirement every single transaction. Well, what happened if maybe you didn't set your password and people were posting into prior periods when they shouldn't have? How can you identify what those entries are to be able to roll back your financials and figure out what on earth happened? Well, there's a report for that in QuickBooks. Where we're going to go is Reports, Accountant and Taxes, and Closing Date Exception Report. So if we look here, this has all the entries that I've posted before the period end date or the closing date set of the 12/31/2029, but occurred after I set the close date. So you can see here, I set this at 9:15, and then we made the entry at 9:17. So if I had made the transactions before this time, the system would have said, hey, I'm good to go, right? It was before the closing date set. But the minute there's anything posted before this date and after this time, it's going to populate in this report. Using this, you'll be able to figure out and bridge your financials. So let's say you already had your taxes filed, right? The IRS already has all of your financials. You need to go back. That has to match. And this is the report that you can use to bridge it. But overall, closing dates are a super important part of your financial close process. It's about the control that you retain over your data and financial integrity. If people can just post all willy-nilly, well, what does a historical income statement mean? Really nothing, because you can't fully trust what's coming through without constantly auditing it. But by using your closing date, you're always making sure that as of whatever date, nothing before that's changing, and you know you can trust it without having to constantly review it. So to me, it's a mandatory part of any software system, not just QuickBooks, Epicor, SAP, you name it. This is about control on data and financials.